Joining me now is Douglas Murray, Associate Editor of The Spectator and the best-selling author of The War on the West. Douglas, yesterday we celebrated our National Day, but sadly the deep loathing of Western culture is certainly evident in this country. The majority support Australia Day and want it to remain on January 26, but the media, academia, increasingly the corporates and of course the activist class, well, they rail against it. This issue though is bigger than Australia. Why is the West so uniquely afflicted with this self-loathing?
Yep, it's exactly the same story, as you say, Rita, across all the Western democracies. The most obvious parallel with what's going on in Australia is what's been going on for years in America with Columbus Day. Columbus Day used to be a great celebration in America, a national holiday, and now it's always an opportunity for people to talk about the horrors of America and basically the idea that it would have been better if Columbus had never sailed out and found the place. So what's happening with Australia Day is very, very similar. This sort of attempt to take away everything that unites us and everything that we have pride in. And, I just don't think that long term you can run societies like that. I'm always very heartened by the fact that most Australians don't suck this up. But as you say, Rita, there's a whole class of person who pushes it on the public to make us feel bad about something which actually is unifying and is meant to make us feel good.
Absolutely, and it's very unifying, I can tell you, for migrants like myself who've come to this country, and this always was, always be rhetoric. It is not inclusive in a number of ways, but talking about inclusiveness, you've written about the manner in which sporting codes shove their version of inclusivity and politics down the throats of clubs and players and fans alike. We see it here all the time with the AFL and the NRL, the local football codes, as well as Cricket Australia. What's the NHL been up to?
The NHL has been the National Hockey League in America. Had a very curious case recently where one of the teams decided to do what was called Pride Night, where all of the players were meant to don pride jerseys and wrap their hockey sticks in rainbow flag tape. And one of the players, who happens to be a Russian Orthodox belief, said he didn't want to do it, that he was, all for tolerance and everything, but he just, it wasn't part of his belief. And the hatred that he was greeted with in America was quite astonishing. One sports commentator said that he should go back to where he came from, and since there was a war going on there, perhaps he could fight in it. So, as I mentioned in this piece in The Spectator, Rita, we've gone quite a long way, haven't we, in a very short space of time, all the way from you've just got to be tolerant to, if you're not tolerant, go back to where you came from and die in a trench. It's quite a development, I would say, and not for the good. I always do the analogy of, the boot on the other foot. That was always a question for rights movements. When the boot is on the other foot, how do you like it? And there are plenty of people who, in the so-called modern rights movements, turn out to be very, very happy and eager to don the jackboots and crush any opposition they find. And the interesting thing is that sporting organizations are so big on that. And you remember, Rita, back 20, 30, 40, let alone 50 or 60 years ago, when, for instance, gay rights actually was a struggle, where were these sporting organizations then? I don't remember them being anywhere. But once the battle is won, like all new converts, they dive in and become the most extreme of all.
And where the battle is still being fought, they're completely absent. You don't see these leagues in the Middle East pushing their politics and tolerance because, there's a price to pay there. And it's extraordinary, really, isn't it? In a country like America, where it is still a very religious country, that it was one sole Russian who said no. All the others who say they're devout Christians and whose own personal beliefs may be at odds with this activism, all fell into line. They all complied. But to New York now, and statues are being torn down and others erected. Tell me firstly, why is Teddy Roosevelt being torn down? And what in God's name is this new statue that's gone up in New York's Flatiron district? If Teddy is too controversial, then how does this demonic-looking thing get erected?
Yeah, if you're a sculptor in modern America, there's quite a lot of career openings for you these days because so many statues have been pulled down from across the country. The whole place is filled with empty plinths. Theodore Roosevelt's, President Theodore Roosevelt's statue was taken down from outside the Natural History Museum in New York. Teddy Roosevelt, among other things, gave America its national parks scheme, but the statue of him was deemed to be outdated and inappropriate because he was sort of being accompanied by a Native American, and therefore this was awful and it had to go. And his great-grandson was among those who voted to remove the statue. It's a very typical modern American story, this. But yes, statues have come down everywhere. All the founding fathers in New York City Council chamber where I'm sitting, the statue of Thomas Jefferson came down. And now we're seeing the sort of stuff, the sort of public art we've got to have instead. That MLK statue that's just recently been unveiled, was unveiled last week in Boston, has been, it depends what angle you look at it from. But various people have pointed out that from certain angles, it either looks like a man holding his head in his hands in despair, or two people holding up a giant turd. It's a very uninspiring piece of statuary, and everyone has to pretend to like it, of course. So I'm not sure that we're moving forward in terms of public art. I think we've gone right down into the toilet.
Well, yes, indeed. I mean, that is just obscene, that new Boston one. I mean, what a terrible tribute to a great man. Now, before you go, I have to ask you about, well, he's been dubbed now the Prince of Wales, W-A-I-L-S, which I love because it's very fitting indeed. But Harry may be in trouble right now with Meghan. There are reports that she was not on board. She was not enthusiastic about the release of Spare, and that the memoir may have hurt their standing in Hollywood.
Well, I mean, she obviously wouldn't be happy about his autobiography because it's about him, and she would want everything to be about her, obviously. So just from the get-go, I think he was going to annoy her. It's interesting that their Netflix series was incredibly dull, Yawnathon. And if I was the Netflix executives, I'd be very cross about that because he saved all the real revelations for his book, as far as one can see. That is, if you regard pissing all over your family as being a revelation. But that's Harry's business. I think that it's true. It's true that if you've got a nose for money, and I think both, well, certainly Meghan has that, she will be worrying about the current standing. There's only a certain amount of dirt you can dish. At some point, there's none left. And Harry he signed a 4-book deal by all accounts for tens of millions of dollars.
Good Lord.
And they'll have other series and things coming. I know. And Rita, I mean, the question is, what else is there? What's he going to give us? A novel? A set of biographical studies of historical figures? An analysis of the Napoleonic Wars? I mean, what are the other books going to be? I dread to think myself. I'm not going to be buying them anyway.
Oh, dear me. And if the family cut him off, if they cease communication with him, there is no new material to expose, or his version of that material. And that seems to be their strategy. They've decided these two cannot be trusted. Any interaction is going to be recorded and retold with their version of the truth.
Nothing is sacred to them. Nothing is sacred.
Absolutely. Douglas Murray, thank you so much for joining me tonight.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you.